Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Supporting Student Investigations webinar brought to you by Orange Audubon Society and the K-12 education team at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Next slide, please. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology is a nonprofit membership institution whose mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds up there in New York. And the K-12 mission, if you can go back to, here we go, is to create innovative resources and training that build science skills while inspiring young people to connect to their local habitats, explore biodiversity, and engage in citizen science projects. And they have a wealth of resources on their website for educators, so check them out. And then Orange Audubon Society, our mission is to promote public understanding of and interest in wildlife and the environment that supports it. So we're happy to be co-sponsoring this program for you tonight. So let's dive right in. So inquiry can be interpreted in many ways. So let's dig into a little bit what inquiry is. So inquiry can lead to a lot of confusion and misunderstanding. I know when I first started teaching, we really drilled in this linear scientific method, but it's much more complex than that. And so the definition has evolved as our scientific processes have expanded. And so let's look at the definition now. Inquiry is asking and answering your own questions. It's a very authentic type of process. And it's more meaningful. It includes project-based learning. And this is very much part of the next generation science standards. It's inherent in science practices, asking and answering questions, defining problems, carrying out investigations, analyzing data, engaging argument from evidence is all in there. So when you're doing inquiry, you're covering a lot of very deep scientific practices with your students. And as we look at inquiry, you can see it's not linear. There's many feedback loops depending on what question is asked. So, you know, an investigation can, of course, start with observations, but it also can start with a question. It can also start by looking at references. So there's a lot of different ways that this model can work. So what is citizen science and what does that have to do with inquiry? And we'll look at that. So it's projects in which volunteers partner with science to answer real world questions. And Cornell Lab has been engaging in citizen science, one of the longest running projects, eBird. And you might participate in that. So the lab citizen science projects have different components: identifying and observing birds, collecting data, entering data online, and retrieving and viewing the data. So these are the ones we're going to focus on, but there are other citizen science projects out there on a wide variety of topics. So why citizen science? So this is something to think about. Students are learning science through inquiry. They're going outdoors to study their local environment. They might develop a lifelong interest in studying nature. They're collecting and using real data. It's not like something in a book that they can't connect to. They're become better equipped to make scientifically sound decisions. And of course, it gets kids outside. It sparks their curiosity. It's just a really great thing to do. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time and require a lot of expensive equipment either. So when you take kids outside and let them do bird observations, it's a great way to motivate them to ask questions. It's a great route to inquiry is what we're trying to say. All right, and we're going to talk about the Investigating Evidence curriculum, which is a free download. And I'll give you the website that you'll be able to download this. And the whole thing is free. Brought to you, there's some different corporate sponsors, and they're listed on that website. And it meets the NGSS through patterns, scale and proportion, asking questions, carrying out investigations. The content relates to ecosystems and earth and human activity. So here's one of the first lessons that is in this curriculum. I'm just going to show you a little bit of what's in there just to kind of whet your appetite. So the big idea is scientific investigations begin with observations and questions. And I've used these materials just so that you know in middle school classrooms. And so the students are going to explore their environment, ask their own questions. They're going to read about scientists. There's a really nice activity where they have several short little biographies of real world scientists. And I actually had students in groups, each have a different scientist, and they did a little mini poster where they put what the scientist was studying, what methods they used, what did they learn, and that kind of thing. And then they presented to everybody, and that was really, and they learned that, you know, scientists work in different places. A lot of them were in the field, and there was a great diversity of scientists too. And they also will discover components of investigations and ways to answer scientific questions. There's a really neat activity in there that's content reading about vultures and how they learned about vultures. It's very interesting. Your students will enjoy it. Okay, we go to the next slide. So here's an activity you can do. This is in the curriculum, and I've used this in several different venues. And it's a sound map. And what you can do, take your students outside somewhere where they could preferably sit down with a notepad, piece of paper, and they're to sit quietly with their eyes closed and listen for sounds for 5 to 10 minutes. It's hard to keep their eyes closed for 10, but 5 minutes at least. And they should focus on the natural sounds that they hear. They're going to hear, you know, street sounds too. What they'll do, as you see here in this drawing, the student will make an X in the middle, that's them, and then they're going to draw or describe what they hear all around it. They can put man-made stuff in there, but hopefully they're listening to some natural things. Maybe they'll hear crickets or frogs or birds or the wind. And once you go back in the classroom, this should hopefully spark some questions. And you could start what's called an I wonder board, where on sticky notes, you put up some of their questions that they might, you know, I wonder why the wind was kept blowing from the right side and not the left side. I wonder why I heard more birds in front of me than behind me. All those kinds of things. Just get them to spark those questions. And it might be an activity you could try at different times of the day, different locations at your school, and it doesn't really need to take up that much time. So we'll go ahead and look at the next activity that you can do. This is called a tiny hike. So you just find somewhere in your schoolyard, and you give the students a little square frame, maybe like ruler, one ruler by one ruler by one ruler, and they're going to take little magnifying glasses and they're going to draw and describe everything they see in that little tiny square. And from there, they can add to the I wonder board, you know, I wonder why there's brown ants here and no red ants, or I wonder why this ant was going that direction and that ant was going a different direction, or maybe they'll see some pollinators on the flowers. They'll come up with all kinds of questions. So let's look at some other activities. So I love this graphic. I used this one in middle school, and it helps us to see that different kinds of questions are answered in different kinds of ways. Of course, scientists don't always do controlled experiments when they have a question. It's not always appropriate, So some things you can just do an observational study, okay? Other things you can do in a controlled experiment. Other types of questions you can answer by analyzing someone else's data, which I'll show you on eBird. Some you go to reference materials. There's all different ways to answer questions. So this is good for students, as you're developing questions, say, okay, how are you going to answer this question? What's the best way? What's the most accurate way to answer it? So let's look at the next slide. So you also want to think about types of questions when you're doing observations. And I love this. So you can look at this pigeon, and it's drinking some water. And let's look at some sample questions that you come up with, and we can try to move from closed questions to more open questions, which lead to inquiry. So let's look at those questions. So the closed questions are, just very simple answers like, look, that pigeon is drinking. What species is that? Well, that's pretty easy to answer. What's it doing? Yeah, it's drinking water. But then we move more inquiry. Why do you think it's doing that? How do birds survive in the city? Will all birds drink from a fountain? That you could do an experiment with that. Will putting out a bird bath attract birds? So you see, we're trying to develop more open-ended inquiry. We go to the next slide. So you can also, there's suggested experiments in this curriculum, and also there's a lot of things in here to help support you using experimental design, kind of walking your kids through just, making their hypothesis and designing the experiment. It's all in there. So let's look at some examples. So imagine you want to see what color bird feeder your local birds prefer. So if you're permitted on your campus, they could have 3 different color bird feeders. Do they prefer red, blue, or green? And then let's see how to set it up. So you would want to have an independent variable, which is one factor that's changed by the experimenter. You want to have a dependent variable, which is measured in the experiment. And everything else are constants or controls that stay the same. So let's see how that would be set up. So the constants would be the location of the feeders, the same area, the kind of seed, and the type of feeder. So these are hopper feeders. The independent variable would be the color. The dependent variable, you'd be measuring how much seed is eaten. They could also count the number of birds that come to each particular feeder. There's different dependent variables that you could come up with. And see, this is pretty simple, but it definitely teaches them experimental design. So here's some students that tried that experiment. You can see them filling the feeders and measuring the seed that's left. And they really, really got into that. And I won't tell you the answer. You'll have to try it yourself. Now you can do just an observational study where they collect data, but they don't change any variables. So let's look at an example of that one. So of course, this is not in Florida, but here the students were studying the effect of snow depth on bird counts. So they would measure the snow each day, and then they would count how many birds came during a set amount of time. And they got their data from that. So that was just a good observational study. Here in Florida, you could do it on amount of cloud cover or temperature, or those kind of things. And here's another observational study. Will suet attract insectivorous species? And so they just observed if the birds would come to the suet. And where will curiosity leave? So this is a cool little experiment that one student did, where they first made like this a dummy, where they had a chair and they filled some jeans and a shirt and shoes and just set it out there. And they had a little cup with seed so the birds would get used to it. And then they wanted to see, well, if a real person went out there, would the birds come? So that's something you'll have to check out for yourself. It was a very interesting study, and it's on YouTube. Now, data exploration is something else that you can use with databases, such as eBird. eBird's really easy to get to. And again, it's high interest because kids can see birds around them. So let's look at how that would work. So eBird data, you share it with scientists and you can use it. You can just go on. You don't even need an account to use it. And this is how it would work. So on eBird, when you go in, it has a place where you can explore species, explore regions. You can look at maps where species are and bar charts, and these would be helpful to do. So let me show you an example of using the charts, and there's graphs in there as well. So here's a graph where they did the bar charts for some local birds, including the bald eagle, the northern mockingbird, the yellow warbler, the northern cardinal, red-winged blackbird. And so you can have your students analyze this and say, well, why do you think, this blue one down here, this is the, I believe that was the yellow warbler. And you say, well, why does the population go up here? That's in April and around late August, early September, and then it goes way down. Why does this one drop and go back up? So they start looking at it, and then they could get the weather for that location, and they'll start asking questions. And that's a great thing, way to lead to inquiry where you don't have to actually go out in the field. Okay, and here's another example. I just pulled this from eBird, just of birds of prey in Florida. And so these are little bar charts, and they can see, okay, northern harrier. And I know you can't see the months really well, but they're not here in May, June, July, and August. Why? And then red-shouldered hawk is here all the time. Why is that? So all these things lead to questions which they can further pursue. So think about how this can work in your classroom. What kind of questions do you think your students would be interested in? And you're on your way to using this curriculum. And this curriculum could be adaptable to any grade level, all the way up to high school. And it's not something you have to use the whole thing. You can pull out what you need. Here's how to download it. Here's the website. Of course, this program is being recorded, so you can go back in later. You can pause this, and then you can get the website. So it's this birds.cornell.edu, and it's investigating_evidence. And then you just click to download, and it's free. Now they do offer, if you like to have a nice color copy that's got spiral binding, it's all together, you don't have to print it, you can get that. It's a small fee, but I did get that. It's worth it. That way you can flip through it and everything. And when you're on their website, there's a lot of other free downloads, but this is very, very useful, and it can apply, pretty much to any grade level. You can adapt it. Okay, so I don't see that there's any questions. So in the interest of time, let me go to the next slide. Next webinar is going to be participating in the Great Backyard Bird Count. This is a great opportunity to get your whole campus, if you want to, involved in citizen or community science. The Great Backyard Bird Count is going to be on February the 1st. Hello, welcome. And this webinar is going to help you to get ready to do that. You'll have all the tools that you need. And let's go to the next one. And here's my contact information. If you have any questions, you're watching this on YouTube, you can email me. If you have any questions at all, I'll be more than happy to help you. If you're in Orange County, I can come do a class visit for you. We also have some limited amount of free classroom subscriptions to our Audubon Adventures from National for grades 3 through 5. So just email me if you're interested in any of those, and I hope that you join me for the next webinar. See you then.